it's funny, like as a director, sometimes you stand up there in front of the room and think somebody's going to come up with the answer. And you're like, oh, that's me. I got to come up with the answer. And you realize like, it doesn't matter that you're not an engineer. You have to design a hologram. Like you have to design a working hologram.
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. Today's episode takes us behind the scenes of director Lisa Joy's new sci-fi mystery, Reminiscence. The film tells the story of Nick, a futuristic private investigator who helps his clients access lost memories. When an alluring new client named May disappears, Nick becomes obsessed with finding her and uncovers a violent conspiracy. Reminiscence is Ms. Joy's feature directorial debut. She has also directed episodes of the television series Westworld. Following a recent screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Ms. Joy spoke with fellow director J.J. Abrams about filming Reminiscence. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Let's just start with how you even got into making movies, telling stories.
I think it's your fault.
I don't blame me. Don't please.
It's your fault. You, we did Westworld together, and then I wanted to direct something then, and then.
But you were writing before that.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about how that started?
Oh yeah, I was training to be a lawyer. No, and then I am a lawyer. Yeah, I went through with that.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Passed the bar, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes. The California bar is unpleasant. And while I was doing that, I wrote my first spec, and it got me staffed on my one and only interview. I was supposed to be interviewing as a writer's assistant or a assistant to the showrunner, and then I somehow got the job. It was very surreal. I had to quit my consulting job, like in the middle of a meeting, and fly back to LA.
So it was dramatic.
It was so dramatic.
Okay, but that's great. And then you started to. We did Westworld together, and obviously with Jonah. And I'm just curious, like, what your approach is to writing and directing TV versus film. It's a question I think that people who do both get asked a lot, and I'm just curious what your point of view is on that.
I mean, this is a good question, and then I want to ask you the question. You can tell me the right answer.
Oh, okay, yeah, you'll have a better answer. Go ahead.
I mean, I think when I was thinking about Reminiscence, I tend to draw and sketch a lot of the scenes and the worlds that I wanted to do, and I knew that I wanted to be anamorphic and to have it feel as immersive as possible. You know, on a screen, you're looking at, something that's smaller than you. And so I think it's really great for character work. And, we do as much world building now on TV with Westworld and a lot of these other shows that you've seen in film. But even the dimensions of it, to me, played a part in it. Like, I wanted to give a subtle sense of vertigo for like the opening shot and really feeling like you were coasting in there. And, for things like visual effects, that everything's going to be blown up so large, and any tiny mistake will be seen. Like for instance, there was one hair on Rebecca's lip as she kissed Hugh in the last shot, and I only saw it on the IMAX screen. I couldn't pick it up on any of the other screens, and then we had to take it out. We had to take it out because it was so distracting to see this one hair. But the same with the hologauns, like that. I wanted to make sure the luminosity of it looked the same and somewhat real and warm and not too opaque. And it really did change. I had to adjust it based on looking on a big screen versus editing on my computer, which is why I had to do during COVID.
So you were editing during COVID?
Yeah.
Were you wearing a mask the whole time during editing?
Yeah. Just alone in my apartment, just to freak out Mark Yoshikawa.
Just talk about how you went from. So the takeaway that all I can think about is the hair on Rebecca Ferguson's lip.
I know.
But there's got to be huge differences, though. That like clearly the work that you do on Westworld, it's so enormous and it's so sprawling, and you say like so appropriately, the world building is enormous and equal to what is done in films. Is there anything in terms of like performances or because there is a beginning, middle, and end to a film, are there approaches that an approach you take to either writing and or directing for the big screen that is that feels different to you? Or is it all kind of one process? It just happens to be a 2 hour as opposed to a
I mean, I think
multi-series?
it feels really different, especially it all starts with the writing, right? Where I'm like, okay, well, in TV, you get to spend so much time with these characters, like really growing with them over time and doing and really being a part of they're in your living room and you're kind of in their living room every week, you know? And there's just such a different tempo to film. And at the same time, I was trying to do a tempo that I haven't seen in a while in film, you know, because I like right now there's so many amazing blockbusters and they're like, you know, they're just really fast paced throughout and there's action throughout. And of course this was like a smaller sized movie. And I kind of like sit right between liking Tarkovsky a lot and like, you know, art house films, but then I really love, you know, the rest of the films, these really commercial films. And so for me, I was wondering about like how to combine those two things in a film that could service character and this like themes of like love and a lot of the stuff that I was interested in, like identity and the male gaze, while still having action set pieces, you know. And I didn't have for film, I don't have a lot of money, you know, and you can't amortize things like TV. So I had to be really, really careful where I spent money to build worlds. And I think the cyclicality of the script, it has to tie up by the end, unlike TV where you can kind of keep going until you figure out where the end is.
I wanted to ask you about something about the male gaze, which I'm really interested about from a female writer-director's point of view. But just first, could you just talk about how Reminiscence went from a concept to a feature?
I mean, when I first wrote it, I was pregnant and at home, and I'd been working on a show. I had to leave because it was a tough cultural environment, and so for the first time, I was able to write in my own voice, and I just, you know, I'm somewhat always stuck between this total idealism, I think, and also like a world weariness that comes from being a total idealist, you know. So there was all the hope that I had for having this baby, and around the same time, my grandfather died, and I was thinking about nostalgia, the beautiful moments in our life, and how important they are, and how universal they are, and how we're all kind of softies and moved. Like we go about our days, and they're always so busy, and there's like very little time for sitting back and reflecting upon those like kind of moments of sublime peace that we have with certain people, you know. And I had time to reflect upon that at that moment, and it was important to me to try to capture the beauty of that because it's such a universal thing, a universal feeling. And at the same time, I'd left a show because, you know, it was before Me Too, and it was very difficult in a room. I was the only female writer. And I felt like one of the things that like was really hurting me at that time was the idea of, you know, I kept being told who I was, you know, like you can't write action, girls aren't smart, girls aren't funny. I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you hear it a lot, it sucks. So I wanted to just take a time to write something totally in my own voice and see and unpack some of those feelings, right? Like I wanted to look at noir because it's such a male genre, you know, and I think a lot of genres are very male in some ways because all the luminaries in them are male. And what is genre but a meme, right? A trope repeated over and over. It develops rules and its own kind of internal logic, right? But that logic wasn't dictated by me. It wasn't created by me or by people like me. And so I tried to look at this very male kind of genre and say, what if I took the essence of that and actually used it to critique, in a way, the very male gaze that it kind of celebrates, you know? And for me, the character of May, so often, you know, everybody knows what a femme fatale is. I say femme fatale, and everybody has an exact image, you know, and that girl's no good, right? And it's a trope that has existed for as long as I can remember, you know? And I wanted to unpack the notion of what is a femme fatale? Like, who are we seeing? Because women get villainized all the time, right? And trivialized all the time. And could I even attack it from this vantage point of, and Hugh is my confederate in this. I told him, we're going to sell this movie that seems like it's about you punching people because that's the kind of movie people will make. But it's really an indictment of the male gaze and the kind of blindness that happens when you're so obsessed in some ways with your own way of seeing things that you can't see the other person clearly. And it's a crazy thing for a movie star to agree to do, right? Because he gets punched a lot, he loses a lot, and he makes a lot of mistakes in it. But, I wanted to show that I wanted to express the female gaze through the male gaze, indicting the male gaze. But also I don't think that he's a villain in it. I literally, it's just a conversation about how hard it is to see people sometimes, how hard it is to really embrace them. And sometimes familiarity, even with that, you can't see them fully. Like Watts was his companion the whole time, and I don't think he was ever really aware of any feelings she may or may not have had for him. But at the same time, they saw each other so clearly. They were veterans in war and things like that, that I think they also saw that it couldn't be romantic. This was something we talked about a lot with the actors. And so that's kind of like, honestly, all writing for me, but especially features, are just me working shit out.
But you had this concept, you wrote the script, and did you always know you wanted to direct this film? Was it always going to be for you to direct?
No, I didn't. I didn't even know if the film would sell or anything. I just wrote it for myself, and then I wrote it first and second trimester, and then I started writing Westworld third trimester, and then it had this like huge bidding war, the script, when it came out, which surprised me. Because I'd never really written a feature before. And so that was great. And then it went to Legendary at first. But because I'd attached myself as a producer, they had a lot of like more commercial directors who wanted to do it. And then there were some, and that's what Legendary liked more, understandably. And they wanted me to change the ending and make it more very happy, And then there was some Director Park, he really wanted to do it. And I remember having all these meetings with him in Korea, and I think he's genius. So I was like him, but then that scared Legendary, right? And so after a while, it just went into turnover. And then later on, Mike DeLuca's my producer. He found some other directors who wanted to do it. And in that kind of last moment when I saw it going off with someone, I was like, I think part of the reason why it's been so hard for me to get on board with a lot of the directors, takes on this is because maybe the take that I have is so specific. I see it in my head, and the movie that results is very much what I saw in my head. So I don't know. I truly stumbled into it. I had to take it to Berlin, and we sold it without anybody attached. Well, Hugh was attached, but we didn't have a studio or anything. We just it came about in a very indie way, I must say.
And in terms of realizing it and having it become what you saw in your head, talk about working with your DP, Paul Cameron, and what kind of conversations you had about how to bring it to life and what that relationship was like.
I mean, I love Paul. He's so talented. His gaze with the camera is so poetic and warm. And I like to say we have a kind of, subliminal connection that needs no words, and that's good because he mumbles a lot and I can never understand what he's saying. But we have this way of talking about film where he's technical and he knows all the things that he wants, and I come at it from him. We have so many talks about it where, I'll just kind of sketch things out that I like, and I'll talk about color palette. Like I told him I didn't want this to have the harsh blues and whites of a lot of sci-fi. I didn't want it to have the cool colors from the color wheel. I wanted it to have more of a Malick feel, to have more of the warm, natural colors, because I was trying to take some of the austerity out of sci-fi. Like in Westworld, in the sci-fi worlds, I lean into those kind of cooler colors in juxtaposition with the West. But in this one, I wanted to bring that warmth to the palette of sci-fi itself so the world could feel more tactile, kind of, And the same thing with lenses. Like I mostly come at it from a vantage point of like a theoretical approach, right? Where for me, it was like this progression is about a man trying to see a woman, right? And the thing that I always thought was interesting about like a long lens or a kind of wider lens, right, is you can get the person's head the same size in any frame, right? It's just a matter of how it bends in the lens, right? So if you have a longer lens, you shoot it from further away. And the way that it looks to me when you shoot, a closer shot from long away is it looks beautiful in the more perfect way, right? Like a photo shoot, like people's pores look the right sfumato, and they kind of there's no warping of the face, right? It's all very proportionate. But then if you went up close with a wide angle lens, you get that, it's like a Malick feel, right? The face looks somewhat distorted, but very intimate somehow and beautiful in its own right. And for Paul, when I was talking to him, I was talking about how in being a thing about seeing someone, when our lovers first meet, we should use a lot of long lenses. So it's like desire or an infatuation where you're watching someone from afar and they look so perfect, and you think you know them. And then as we come to see the characters, we creep into a wider lens closer up, and you can see almost the ugliness in their faces, the asymmetries and the things that are off about them, including with Hugh, right? When he turns kind of, mad with desire. And
so you're saying Hugh Jackman is ugly and asymmetrical?
I did tell him in a shot where he was holding the gun on Booth, I said, let's make yourself ugly.
This is where it happened. This is where Lisa Joy said,
yeah,
Hugh Jackman is ugly and asymmetrical.
I asked him to make himself, I was like, you should be ugly in this scene. You're no longer the hero. Now you're the villain right here, and let yourself be ugly. And we just did this long push on him, and he was like shaking, and his face was contorted with rage, and I was like, perfectly ugly. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you for doing that for me.
There are really incredible visuals in this movie, and you mentioned earlier that you did not have the budget one might think you did for the movie. How did you deal with the ambition of this first feature film of yours with such, I think a remarkable scope, and accepting the box you were given in which to make it?
I mean, I think Westworld helped me a lot, right? Because I knew a little bit where I could put knowing where visual effects will take you far helps you know where to invest in the practical. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know like postage stamping in distant buildings, that's nothing, right? But like, other stuff that you don't think is going to be expensive is really, really expensive. So I kind of knew which buckets to lean into and which buckets to stay away from. And so when I was planning The Sunken World, I knew that we'd made huge, huge strides with water in VFX, which water used to be impossible, and now it's not. And so I wanted to capitalize on that. But I also wanted to build some of it practically. That's another thing we do on Westworld all the time is like, make sure the actors have something to interface with and that the visual effects team has something to build off of. I knew the underwater fight would only look good practically in this world. I remember I was flying coach when I was scouting Miami. I was like, don't put me, save the money for the thing. And I remember we went to this theme park in New Orleans where we built Miami and the Coconut Club and everything. And Howard Cummings, my incredible production designer, he said, look, I want to show you the sketches and they're so beautiful and it would look so beautiful. And he's like, but we can't afford it. Like, we cannot do this. And I was like, show me the sketches. And he showed me the sketches and I was like, build it. And he was like, how am I going to build it? And I'm like, just build, just don't stop working. Just keep building it. We're going to find the money. And then I waived my producer's fees and my husband waived his and, I worked for scale and we got it done.
That's awesome. In terms of the shoot, were there any, because I know it was, when you have a limited schedule, a limited budget, it is obviously sometimes a gift because weirdly you're forced to reconcile like the vision you have of what you can do it with and you realize what's essential. But I'm just curious, were there any particular pieces of this besides flying coach that were particularly difficult? It's meant to be a joke.
The hologauze was actually very, very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, to get the look of the...
Yeah, the look of the machine in which Hugh and Tandaway view memories, that was really hard. That was something that we were doing that was new. And it's funny, like as a director, it's like sometimes you stand up there in front of the room and think somebody's going to come up with the answer. And you're like, oh, that's me. I got to come up with the answer. And you realize, like, it doesn't matter that you're not an engineer. You have to design a hologram. Like, you have to design a working hologram. And like embracing that, like, it's like, oh shit, like, I've just got to design something. And, I remember sitting there and being like, I think it should be circular. And if we just put, this scrim around the edge, because we were at first going to make it flat, but to me, it wouldn't dimensionalize right. It wouldn't feel like a 360 circulation of an object if it was a square, right? Because then you're just dealing with planar fields. So I worked with my incredible team. And this was a huge effort between Howard, Paul, and Bruce, my visual effects, to come up with this circular machine. We hung it with a luminous but porous material called hologauze, which, I could talk about this for a long time, but trust me, you don't want to hear it. And my goal was to be able to shoot the holograms practically so that when Hugh was on set, he could see exactly what Bannister in the film is seeing, right? Which means that he had to be able to circle in real time a 360-degree machine and see an active, ephemeral, moving, full-life scene playing out in front of him in all its dimension. And so, it was a tall order, but we did it, and we didn't have repeatable heads. We didn't have any fancy things, so we had to do it by, I remember, it was good because a lot of it was to music. So I'd try to walk and hold the lapels of my Steadicam operator and be like, we're swaying to the beat, and this is going to be how Hugh is going to walk around this. And every scene, we would just delineate the circumference of the machine itself so that it wouldn't, flout the laws of physics. And then we would predict the ways in which Bannister would interact with the thing, or Watts, or a third-party perspective. And then we would simply shoot the scene from his eye line and rotate around it, and in addition to traditional coverage. And so if he ducks down, we would duck down with the camera and look under the table and then sit back up. And then on the day, we circled around Hugh, projecting that around the 360 circle, and then also filming what we shot at the same time. And so it was a lot to, it was a lot of coordination, but it was a very beautiful effect on the day. And so many of his scenes, I mean, that's where I saved some money, right? I had one standing set that I could put people in, and I knew that the hologauze, I could put scenes within scenes in there and hopefully broaden the world a little bit. And so, yeah, that's how we did that.
Just a couple more questions. There's a great scene with Rebecca and Tandaway in the bank. And can you just talk about that a little bit and what it was to direct that and what you were kind of hoping to get from it?
So cool. I mean, to get those two, strong, brilliant, beautiful women in a room doing that scene together was so fun, because in this movie, Hugh's character is blind, and these two women see each other pretty perfectly, right? They can cut through the bullshit, and there's also not the same judgment in a way. Because there are no illusions, there's also not the same amount of damnation if those illusions are broken, and Rebecca's character references it with Tandaway, talking about how she would judge her, but not see her differently, right? If she knew about Rebecca's past as a drug addict, and for me, that means if you can see someone fully, then you can judge them a little bit and be like, what you did was fucked up, right? But if you can't see them fully, if you're seeing an image of them that's idealized, you can't even judge them in those little ways that everybody is subject to being judged, because it breaks and crumbles the entire foundation of that gaze, right? And so her concern was Bannister wouldn't judge her if he knew she was a addict. And I think it's true. He would have been like, it's okay, but then he probably wouldn't have seen her the same way again. And, I've seen this with guys all the time who are like, I don't judge my girlfriend for having had more boyfriends than me, in the past, but she's also not the girl I'm going to marry. Do you know, there's these implicit things that's no, I'm way more open-minded than that. And then, but you still get stuck in this box, and these two women are, acknowledging that those things exist and forming an odd kind of moment of grace between the two of them, where they do the honor of at least seeing each other clearly, even if they don't even like each other that much. They respect each other.
So, you sunk Miami. What was obviously we're living in a messed up world.
Says the man in a mask.
Global warming is upon us. I'm just curious what the research you've done, you did for this, and just in terms of realizing it, what the hardest part of that was, of bringing that to the screen.
Originally the script did not have Miami underwater because it was a total indie, right? It was just, but when it was my turn to direct, I decided to sink Miami, in part because I knew I could do it on the budget level. But I also, for me, it was like, how can you do something that's even remotely futuristic and not take into account global warming at this point? Like, it's such a reality, right? It's like doing movies where phones don't exist, unless it's so stylized that you're saying phones were never invented. You have to acknowledge cell phones, which is a real bummer if you're doing like mysteries or chases or stuff. When you have a cell phone, everything can be much more easily, lots of third acts were blown to smithereens by cell phones. But so it just became a thing for me where it's like you have to acknowledge, and I didn't want it to be the primary subject of it, but for the setting and the world, it might have felt, even when I started directing it, kind of forward-looking. And then when the film came out, the New York Times had on its front page, Miami's sinking, and they're building these barriers to stop the water. And the barriers look exactly like the ones that Howard designed in the film, and it was crazy. I sent it to Howard, and I was like, what's happening here, But yeah, I think that's the thing. I think all science fiction at this point, if it's concerning futurism and like life on Earth, has to probably deal with some of those realities. Otherwise, it might feel a little bit kind of antiquated later, I guess.
Well, I have to say, to have an idea for something, to write it, that alone is somewhat a miraculous thing. And then to have that thing sell and to have that thing get made and then to be the one to direct it and realize it as you saw it is just such a huge and awesome accomplishment. And I'm so happy for you, and really grateful that you asked me to do this, and grateful to you for coming. So thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. If you'd like to hear more, The Director's Cut is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.